Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So today I wanted to come to you all with a message that is actually inspired from this old book that I've already shared with you all before, but it's by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's just a collection of his essays, and it's really becoming one of my most treasured books very quickly, because it's like anytime I pick it up, I can flip to any page at all and it's got something valuable for me. And when you have the time to pick up a book and read it cover to cover, that's always enjoyable. I've done that a lot in the past, but with my schedule today, I just prefer to kind of just pick and choose and flip through. So a book like that, where you don't have to start at the beginning, but you can just find these beautiful golden nuggets of wisdom just scattered throughout. Doesn't matter what page you flip to. I mean, those are beautiful resources, right? So I happened to flip to his essay on spiritual laws, and it didn't take long for me to start to see the bigger picture of his point. And that's what I love about his writing, because it's like you can read a title like that, for example, Spiritual Laws, and this is what I want to encourage you to become aware of in yourself, okay? Because I had to do this with myself, but it's like we operate automatically with these preconceived ideas about things sometimes. And so, like, for example, I can read that title to this essay and think I have an idea already what it's going to be about. And as I started reading through, I quickly realized the much bigger meaning and message that was there for me, and how multi-layered it was, multifaceted. And so it was very much aligned with where I was anyway in my mind with regards to the message today. And so I hope that you'll hang with me. I'm going to read an excerpt from this, and hope that we're going to just go slowly, and I hope that it's going to work the magic for you as well, in peeling back those layers of any kind of preconceived ideas you have about anything. I feel like when you approach life with a desire to learn and grow, then this process comes easier to you anyway. But sometimes we have to work at it, depending on what's going on in our life and all the stresses of life and the distractions and things like that. Sometimes it takes a conscious effort to make ourselves stay aware. So the overarching theme today, and it is going to be multifaceted, but there's a lot of different areas of focus or topics that are going to merge together for this bigger picture. But one of the main areas is balance. And the reason why is because we have to consider how we were impacted being in a relationship or an environment or connection that was very toxic and controlling. We have to acknowledge that actually impacted us in ways that we may not be fully conscious of yet. That takes a while, because it's, they call it conditioning, and it just like you're conditioned, it happens on this, I feel like, this other layer of our awareness. I feel like it's more of like a subconscious or even unconscious process. And so I feel like the discovery of how we were conditioned and all the ways that these very inauthentic, exploitative connections impacted us, it takes a while. It takes a while for us to become fully aware and conscious of all of the layers of conditioning that we were subjected to, and therefore how our perceptions have been impacted. And so to unravel that, to truly unravel all of that conditioning and make sense of it, is a process. And I know that, at least for me, when you first come into this awareness and you're able to safely move yourself to a more peaceful environment, it's like you want to you want to just get on with your life. But you know, I mentioned before, you have to feel your feelings, and then the processing stage, you know, can take a while, not just with your feelings, but once you move past that, then it's the processing, like I mentioned recently, of the logic piece, just trying to make sense of things. So so we learned a lot of lessons, you know, from these experiences that were very toxic to us, sometimes literally, sometimes physically, bodily toxic in that regard, but definitely emotionally toxic and spiritually toxic and all that, right? Psychologically. So you know, the lessons, you know, yes, we did learn what an inauthentic connection is like. So that's a good lesson. It's a good lesson. But because we were engaged in that for so long, and we weren't able to logically label it what it truly was, we kept trying to fix it, right? And so that put us in this, it conditioned us to live in a mode of striving, just as our natural state, just striving and striving. And so when you hear people talk about spinning your wheels, I'm not talking about these kind of wheels. These wheels are good. That's what we're doing now, spinning the working the mental wheels, right? But I'm talking about you know, all the circular conversations that didn't make sense, and no matter what you tried, it wasn't enough. And even if they said they were happy and content and everything was good, you know, their body language said something different, and all this stuff. It's like you're trying so hard to figure it out when you're in it. It's like it conditions you to just stay in this hyperactive state of like an emergency type of state, but you don't know what the emergency is or what the problem is. You can't really pinpoint it. So it's just this, you're striving. It's a state of striving. And so, you know, you're so stressed. A lot of times you can't even sleep. And by the way, I want to pause here and say, sometimes if a person is engaged or enmeshed in a narcissistic relationship, you know, being abused, a lot of times they will actually intentionally sleep deprive you, and that may take years to discover. There may be a lot of weird things, but you chalk it up to different things, you know, keeping you awake until you realize that, you know, your body has declined greatly. You can't even think straight. You don't even have short-term memory anymore. You can't even string a sentence together. It may get to that point where you just can't make sense of things logically. Your mind is suffering, your body is suffering, and one day you realize, hang on, you know, and then maybe you've even moved and you've changed, you know, your houses, and still there's an issue keeping you awake, and so you realize that it's more than environmental. So my point is, sometimes sleep deprivation is intentional. I just want you to be aware of that. I hope that helps, that I mentioned that when you're reflecting back. But all the guilt tripping, you know, just trying to sort everything out in our minds, it's exhausting. So sometimes the striving isn't literal, physical. Sometimes the striving is here, you know. And so I don't think sometimes we associate that word striving with mental effort, but that's what you're doing, and you're exhausted. You're wearing yourself out, and on top of them wearing you out and everything. So it's to get to a point where you're back in balance is critical. And a lot of times we almost don't want to rest until we figure it out. I bet you probably know what that's like. And so I hope that this has piqued your interest, because I'm going to offer you some insights today that hopefully will, as I went through this process of journaling and reading, it brought me peace. It brought me some insights in my reflection that it culminated in a peaceful feeling for me, a peaceful state. And as you're connecting those dots, you know what I mean? So I hope that it does the same for you. And if you remember recently our discussion on chaos, it's total chaos. You can't rest, you can't have peace in chaos, right? That requires some some amount of order. And we talked about how order is found all throughout nature. And so we're going to really be inspired today and as we're reading and throughout our discussion by nature. And so we're going to learn from how nature operates. Okay, and so with that, I want to read to you a Bible verse here. This is going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. It says, the person without the Spirit, this is the New International Version, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. So, yes, and then we have, it's changed out when it says the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit. It's changed out in different versions, translations. It says like the natural person, right, does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. So even though we're pulling things from nature, there is this spiritual, or like Esty said, numinous aspect of us as human beings. And so that's going to serve as that compass inside of us, that inner guiding light that's going to help us discern and put all these pieces together. And this is where I love that verse, because it's talking about how you have to have eyes to see and ears to hear to be able to understand this language of someone who has gone through and survived and come out of psychological abuse, narcissistic abuse. It changes you, right? You're a new creation now, and you're learning how to be your best self as this new creation, right? Just like I mentioned before, it's like you're a baby when you're reborn. So we're trying to usher in gently, right? Slowly and softly, we're trying to usher in our new state as being one founded on peace and not striving, not chaos. And so, like I said, we're going to be pulling some inspiration from nature, because there is a numinous element to nature too. We're going to see what that means. All right, so yes. Another piece of that conditioning when we are involved in a narcissistic engagement, connection, we become conditioned to try to defend ourselves, our truths, because especially when you become aware of what they call smear campaigns. In other words, and you may see this like early on, and maybe if you're reflecting back and you're just trying to make sense of things, you may identify it, in hindsight. But it's, for me, early on, I didn't know how to label it or make sense of it, but you may be able to identify this when connections that both you and the narcissistic person know, if they start treating you differently all of a sudden, or just read the body language. There's a lot of different ways to communicate. It's not just verbal. So, you can tell if there's a shift in the way a person treats you. And if you know that there hasn't been any kind of disagreements or anything there, they're typically a very amicable, cooperative type person, but suddenly they've changed the way they interact with you. Well, it's likely that there was some type of slander made against you, some kind of smear campaign, they call it, right? And so when you start to become aware of this, it's infuriating, because it's like, you know what you know, and when you become aware of this, it's like you just want so bad to defend yourself. But see, the problem with this is that can be a trap, that can be a snare, because people are not going to see what you see in this abusive person. They're going to see the mask. So when you start reacting, right, by defending yourself and your truths, that's going to make you possibly play right into whatever the smear campaign was. They may have said something like, yeah, they've just become really sensitive lately. I don't know what's up with them. And they're just accusing everybody of everything. It's almost like this paranoia. And so if you play into that, it's just going to validate what this smear campaign was. You see what I'm saying? So I want to caution you against reacting in any way. And I understand that, we do want to use our voice to scream our truths, but just make sure that you acknowledge that, you validate yourself, and it's good to have someone to validate your experience, to help get you grounded again in reality, because for so long your life was like just like a fantasy novel, but in a bad way, like a nightmare, right? The Twilight Zone. I've called it the Twilight Zone for a long time, and that's how it's felt. So to get grounded again and rooted in logic, sometimes that takes using your voice, but use it wisely, like with a therapist who truly has a good background in this type of abuse, psychological abuse. Not just any therapist. I would encourage you to vet your therapist or anybody that you confide in, because otherwise it may come back on you and do more damage. So you may even, if you're just not regulating your thirst for wanting to share your truths, if you're just throwing it out there anywhere and everywhere, you may come off as what they call a virtuous narcissist, a hypocrite, because again, other people can't see what you see in a psychologically abusive person, because they're wearing a mask. There's two different sides to him. There's the public persona and the one behind closed doors. So now I want to reference a few Bible verses here, and then we'll move forward. So, all right. So this is going to set the tone for the discussion I'm going to read, or the excerpt we're going to read in the Emerson book here, okay? All right, so Jonah chapter 4 verse 10 says, "Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight." Matthew chapter 6 verse 28 says, "And why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin." Luke chapter 12 verse 27 says, "Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. But I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these." John chapter 4 verse 38 says, "I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." And then Proverbs 23:4 says, "Do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it." So you'll see how these all tie in, but I'm just setting the tone for us here, the mental space. So, all right, as we dive into this this excerpt of this literature piece, I just ask you to set aside your, what they call the monkey mind. Just kind of try to turn that down, dial it down, or set it aside, because we really want to engage our logic, and we want to be able to do that slowly, okay? So, all right, we're going to start. Well, I don't know how many copies of this book there are out there, but if you happen to have one, it's going to be on page 53. So it's essentially the Spiritual Laws essay from Emerson. All right, and it's going to be, I'm going to read quite a bit of this excerpt, so just hang with me, and hopefully it will bless you with some insights. When the act of reflection takes place in the mind, when we look at ourselves in the light of thought, we discover that our life is embosomed, I think that's it, embosomed in beauty. Behind us as we go, all things assume pleasing forms, as clouds do far off. Not only things familiar and stale, but even the tragic and terrible are comely as they take their place in the pictures of memory. The riverbank, the weed at the waterside, the old house, the foolish person, however neglected in the passing, have a grace in the past. Even the corpse that has lain in the chambers has added a solemn ornament to the house. The soul will not know either deformity or pain. If in the hours of clear reason we should speak the severest truth, we should say that we had never made a sacrifice. In these hours, the mind seems so great that nothing can be taken from us that seems much. All loss, all pain is particular. The universe remains to the heart unhurt. Neither vexations nor calamities abate our trust. No man ever stated his griefs as lightly as he might. Allow for exaggeration in the most patient and sorely ridden hack that ever was driven. For it is only the finite that has wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose. The intellectual life may be kept clean and healthful if man will live the life of nature and not import into his mind difficulties which are none of his. It's like mind your own business, right? I'm going to pause here and just share my thoughts with you. I feel like this is talking about how we were talking recently about the subjective reality versus the objective. It's like anytime we overcomplicate things, and this is not, it doesn't have to be to the extreme of someone who's living a life of deceit and manipulation, like a narcissistic type person. It can just be, like I said, it's a spectrum. Sometimes it can just be any of us that, in light of striving, right, or trying to prove yourself, or what is it where he said, I love how he says, no man, it says, neither vexations nor calamities abate our trust. No man ever stated his griefs as lightly as he might. So in other words, it's like we can sometimes make things a bigger deal than what they are, and we can layer our reality with this urgency, this sense of heightened importance with whatever's going on, this drama, this chaos, and it's not necessary. And that's what I'm getting from it so far. So it says the intellectual life may be kept clean and healthful if man will live the life of nature and not import into his mind difficulties which are none of his. No man need be perplexed in his speculations. Let him do and say what strictly belongs to him, and though very ignorant of books, his nature shall not yield him any intellectual obstructions and doubts. Our young people are diseased with the theological problems of original sin, origin of evil, predestination, and the like. I have to say, when I read that, I was thinking of myself, how I'm always trying to figure things out. I have such an interest in psychology, and it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. These never presented a practical difficulty to any man, never darkened across any man's road who did not go out of his way to seek them. And that right there related to realizing that upon reflection of a toxic relationship or situation, you realize that, your engagement within it required you to shift over, off of your path. And so that's what happened, right? And so, yes, we were fooled. Yes, we were absolutely lured and fooled to do so, but we did do it. And a lot of times in hindsight, you can see all the red flags that were ignored, as part of that process. So, I learn a lot for myself when I'm reading this too. So, yeah. Yes, these are the soul's mumps and measles and whooping coughs, and those who have not caught them cannot describe their health or prescribe the cure. A simple mind will not know these enemies. And it's just like people who haven't been through narcissistic abuse are not going to understand it. They're not, right? You have to experience it. It is quite another thing that he should be able to give account of his faith and expound to another the theory of his self-union and freedom. This requires rare gifts. Yet without the self-knowledge, there may be a sylvan strength and integrity in that which he is. A few strong instincts and a few plain rules suffice us. My will never gave the images in my mind the rank they now take. The regular course of studies, the years of academical and professional education have not yielded me better facts than some idle books under the bench at the Latin school. What we do not call education is more precious than that which we call so. We form no guess at the time of receiving a thought of its comparative value, and no education often wastes its effort in attempts to thwart and balk this natural magnetism, which is sure to select what belongs to it. In like manner, our moral nature is vitiated by any interference of our will. People represent virtue as a struggle and take to themselves great airs upon their attainments, and the question is everywhere vexed when a noble nature is commended, whether the man is not better who strives with temptation. But there is no merit in the matter. Either God is there or he is not there. We love characters in proportion as they are impulsive and spontaneous. The less a man thinks or knows about his virtues, the better we like him. And then, I'm not sure how to say this, Timoleon's victories are the best victories, which ran and flowed like Homer's verses. Plutarch said, when we see a soul whose acts are all regal, graceful, and pleasant as roses, we must thank God that such things can be and are, and not turn sourly on the angel and say, Crump is a better man with his grunting resistance to all his native devils. Yes, and then it goes on to talk about, how we can misunderstand these great figures throughout history that have achieved a lot, and how we want to give them credit for their achievements. But he's saying that none of them can say, or it says they have always sung, not unto us, right? And then it says, according to the faith of their times, they have built altars to fortune or to destiny or to St. Julian. Their success lay in their parallelism to the course of thought, which found in them an unobstructed channel, and the wonders of which they were the visible conductors, seemed to the eye their deed. Does that make sense? Like, I had to look at that closely, but it's kind of like there's this flow, this creative force that makes up our reality, and we are but the vessels, right? The jars of clay. And it's flowing through us, and where we get snagged is where our ego wants to grab hold of these accomplishments that flow through us and tempt us to lay claim to this as our own, right? And so I thought that was really interesting. And then again, if you think of that spectrum, a narcissistic person may have the tendency to do this, more often, even to the extreme of trying to take credit for other people's achievements. And it's just incredibly corrupted at that point, at that level. And so these types of books, pieces of literature are so valuable to me, because the way they're written, if you're willing to take your time with it truly and just work through it slowly, it's like it gives you so many layers of insights for not only the way somebody truly deeply enmeshed in toxicity might operate, insight into the corruption part that drives them, but also aspects within ourselves where we can, learn and become conscious of it and refine ourselves and grow. It doesn't mean that we are equally yoked with someone who is on the extreme side, because again, like I say, there's a huge difference in someone who is intentionally exploiting and lying and manipulating someone, and someone who's not, someone who just is imperfect, in the flesh, and imperfect but trying. There's a huge difference. So I always find value in everything I read, I'm focused on my own growth and becoming conscious, but sometimes it gives me insight into people that I have associated with in the past too, that were very toxic for myself. So I hope that you're putting the puzzle pieces together as we go along reading this. I hope it's starting to make sense to you. He just expands on this concept, and I love how, his writing is reminiscent to me of Estes, where it's very poetic and enjoyable to read. He says, like, we interfere with the optimism of nature, right? And then he talks about nature will not have us fret and fume. She does not like our benevolence or our learning much better than she likes our frauds and wars. In other words, nature just is. It is. It's the realest real. You know what I mean? And then here we come along, laying our subjective reality on top, trying to pretend like, it's all our doing, all the good things is, because of all of us, when really, we make a lot of mistakes as humans. And so it's just really interesting to me. And it talks about, when we come out of some kind of big gathering, of great minds, maybe like a political type meeting, or anything where people are meeting and trying to share thoughts and with regards to big changes in the world, or anything that's considered important in our society. When we come out of that, he says, nature says to us, "So hot, my little sir." And it's like, that's so funny to me. It's humorous because it's like we get all worked up. And I like how he says, "My little sir." It's like yeah, in the end, nature prevails. And so we're not so important as we think we are. You know what I mean? And that law right there is what's going to bring us peace, in knowing that people who are living behind a mask for their own gain and exploiting others, it's not going to last. It's just not. And that should bring you a level of peace, just knowing that right there. You know what I mean? Just like the faulty bricks, you know what I'm saying? Like I referenced before, building the wall, it's not going to last if it's fake. And so he says we are full of mechanical actions, right? Yeah, we must needs intermeddle and have things in our own way until the sacrifices and virtues of society are odious. Yes, love should make joy, but our benevolence is unhappy. And then he talks about, he says, we pain ourselves to please nobody. There are natural ways of arriving at the same ends at which these aim but do not arrive. So he even gives reference to, forcing children to sit down and tolerate and be subjected to, hours of, what do you call it? I'm at a loss for words right this minute, but like, almost like a seminar, it's like, it's a shame because children are not, it's not their natural state to sit still through something like that. That's why recess is so important, to allow them, because and I've mentioned to you guys before, I used to be a teacher, and it's true, when kids come back in after recess, they're really going to pay attention so much better than before they've had that, especially after they've sat for so long. They need that. It's just nature. So the point here is to not fight against nature. It's kind of like this spirit of non-resistance, which we've talked about before, right? And you have to be careful that we don't look at this the wrong way, because on one hand you might look at non-resistance through the lens of just allowing someone to treat you poorly and not resisting that, when my point here is, what I'm trying to get at is non-resistance to nature, meaning there's consequences for treating someone poorly. So instead of us just stepping in and trying to prevent this person from facing the consequences of our leaving or whatever it is, being called out or pushing back, or just simply saying no to someone demanding and trying to plow down our boundaries or whatever it is. It's like we should understand that, we can't, it's not going to hold up even with us forever to do that. We're going to destroy ourselves in that process. And so that's what I mean by non-resistance, just removing ourselves from, a situation like that, and that's the natural consequence, right? If you treat someone poorly and you're never cooperative and you're always causing, strife and chaos and stuff, well, the natural consequence is that you're not going to have anybody that wants to be close to you. So, I love the way he writes. I love it. See if I can find like a closing piece here to share with you. In other words, he's trying to shift our perspective. I'll give you an example. Our society is encumbered by ponderous machinery which resembles the endless aqueducts that the Romans built over the hill and dale, and which are superseded by the discovery of the law that water rises to the level of its source. It's like nature's going to outsmart you every time, It is a Chinese wall which any nimble Tartar, I'm not sure, can leap over. It is a standing army, not so good as a peace. It is a graduated, titled, richly appointed empire, quite superfluous when town meetings are found to answer just as well. Let us draw a lesson from nature, which always works by short ways. Yes. When the fruit is ripe, it falls. Yes. And so he expands on that. So it was just really a joy for me to read that for myself. I just couldn't wait to share it with you all. So now I'm going to share in relation to that some Native American quotes, because I've always been inspired by the Native American culture and how they live with nature, not against nature, right? It's going with the flow. It's non-resistance for the benefit of all. It's not being self-centered. It's their culture and their approach to this reality is one that is not ego-centered, and so it's beautiful. They're my understanding is that they're a very spiritual people. And so let's take a look at some quotes here. The elders were wise. They knew that man's heart away from nature becomes hard. They knew that lack of respect for growing, living things soon led to a lack of respect for humans too. And that quote is from Chief Luther Standing Bear. And then we have, the earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And that's Chief Seattle. And then finally, I have, treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And that's a Native American proverb. So I thought that was cool too. So I feel like, we talked before about listening to our bodies and how sometimes before the logic about what we're experiencing in like a psychologically abusive relationship, sometimes the logic lags behind, and the first indication that something is off is our feelings, our bodies, right? And so if you think about that through that lens, non-resistance feels the best, right? There's no striving, there's no resistance. And so I feel like our feelings serve as our detection system. You know what I mean? They're there for a purpose and a reason. And to be able to engage our logic with our feelings is just, I feel like, giving us a superpower. It's just going to benefit us so much. So, narcissistic type individuals are all about control. And we have to be careful that in trying to defend ourselves, if we do become aware of smear campaigns, for example, we have to be careful that we are not operating out of fear about the smear campaign and therefore trying to, prove anything. We know what we know, and it's our truth. And people can choose to not believe us, and that doesn't have to affect us. And so just understand that you don't have to defend the truth. It just is what it is. And I feel like people who are meant for us are not going to be swayed by some kind of, talk, slander. They're going to observe and want to learn you for themselves. So I hope that this has inspired you to let go of any remnants of a spirit of urgency that the narcissistic person you may have been engaged with tried to gift you with. I hope you understand that it's really more like a virus to operate that way out of fear. With this just this nervousness, about your character. Just know your character will speak for itself. And people will always misunderstand you. Some people will. And it just is what it is. And the way I feel about it is, that's how you can identify your people that way. Just like we opened this discussion today talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. Just take that to heart and understand that a lot of people aren't going to understand you. And instead of that being a bad thing, just know that it's actually a very, very beautiful thing. So I thank you for coming along today with me to listen to the message. I hope that it has gotten the wheels turning for you. I hope that you were able to apply your own lens to everything and get something from it. And I just hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.